At 52 years old, I sold my apartment, quit a stable job, and moved to a farmhouse 3 hours from the nearest decent coffee shop. My friends thought I was having a breakdown. My accountant thought I was making the worst financial decision of my adult life. My sister didn't speak to me for 2 months. They weren't entirely wrong to worry, because what I expected to be a peaceful, fresh start turned into one of the most humbling, expensive, and unexpectedly funny educations of my life. Here's everything I wish someone had told me first. For 28 years, I lived in the city. Not just lived in it, I was built by it. The city had been background noise so long that the commute was just Tuesday, and paying $14 for a sandwich produced no particular emotion. That was just life. I had a decent job in corporate project management, a 2-bedroom apartment that cost me roughly the GDP of a small island nation, and a social life that looked full from the outside, which is the city's greatest trick. But somewhere around 50, something started quietly grinding. Not a crisis, nothing dramatic. More like a sound you didn't notice until you noticed it, and then couldn't stop noticing. Traffic at 6 a.m., the neighbor's television through the wall, the specific fact that I'd lived next to 12 people for 4 years without knowing a single name. I started asking a question I hadn't asked in a long time. The honest answer was no. It just took me 2 more years to do anything about it. But something was going to have to change. It started with a Zillow habit. Nothing serious, just browsing. The kind of thing you tell yourself is pure curiosity. You look at a 4-bedroom farmhouse with 2 acres and a barn for roughly the same price as your parking spot, and you think, interesting. Good to know. But the browsing became a spreadsheet, and the spreadsheet became a folder, and the folder became a conversation with a financial advisor who looked at me the way doctors look at people who've been Googling their symptoms. I want to be clear about something. There was no single dramatic moment. No morning I woke up and heard the call of the open road. It was more like a slow accumulation of smaller things. Things like realizing I'd filed 3 noise complaints in 1 calendar year, that my dentist was genuinely the person I talked to most in any given month, and that my upstairs neighbor had developed a very serious commitment to furniture rearrangement at 11 p.m. And then one Sunday, I drove out to visit a college friend who had moved to rural Pennsylvania 2 years before. I sat on his back porch for 3 hours. I didn't look at my phone once. That was the moment. Now, before you picture me romantically packing a truck and driving into the sunset, let me stop you right there. I spent 14 months researching before I moved, and what those 14 months kept showing me was a lot of beautiful photography of country life, and very little honest information about what it actually costs, requires, and takes out of you. So I started making calls to contractors, to county zoning offices, and to people who had made the move rural and then quietly moved back to the city within 18 months. And they all said a version of the same sentence. It's a lot more work than you think, which I, in my considerable city wisdom, heard as, this person just wasn't as prepared as I'll be. I was not as prepared as I thought I'd be, but I made the move anyway, because the research also showed me something else. The people who stayed weren't staying because the city was better. They were staying because change is genuinely frightening, and frightening yourself out of things gets easier every year you do it. At 52, I had run out of patience for that particular habit. Moving day was October 14th. The house was beautiful, old, a little drafty, and genuinely beautiful. The land was quiet in a way that felt physical, like something you could hold. And then, on day 3, the well pump stopped working. In the city, when something breaks, you call the building super and you wait. In rural areas, you call a well specialist, and they tell you they can come Thursday, and it is currently Monday. This was my first lesson in what self-reliance actually means. It doesn't mean you can fix everything. It means you make peace with timelines that are completely outside your control, and you have to have enough water stored to get through it. I had not stored water, because in 52 years of city living, it had never once occurred to me that I needed to. The well taught me lesson 1. Lesson 2 came from the silence. And when I say silence, I don't mean silence as a concept. I mean the physical experience of the city's entire soundtrack being gone. The traffic, the sirens, the neighbor's television, the 2 a.m. emergency vehicle with its Doppler fade. All of it replaced, overnight, by wind and field, and the specific quiet of a night with no street lights. At first, I thought it was extraordinary. By week 2, my nervous system didn't know what to do with it. I'd spent nearly 3 decades training my nervous system to filter constant stimulus. And suddenly, there was no stimulus to filter. And my brain kept searching for it anyway. It took a full 6 weeks before I could sleep through the night without waking up and listening for something that wasn't there. And then, one morning, around week 7, I sat on that porch and genuinely did not want to be anywhere else. But before we get to that, there are a few things you need to know first. Let's get specific, because this is the part that actually matters if you're seriously thinking about this. First up, internet. If you work remotely, internet is not optional and it is not uniform. A rural broadband availability is inconsistent in ways that will genuinely catch you off guard. According to the FCC's 2023 Broadband Deployment Report, roughly 14.5 million Americans still lack access to high-speed fixed internet, and rural areas account for the vast majority of that gap. I spent 3 weeks testing 4 different solutions before I found one reliable enough for video calls. So here is the rule. Before you make any offer on a rural property, you drive to that driveway and you test the actual connection speed from your laptop, not from a coverage map. Coverage maps are optimistic. Treat them like someone describing their own personality on a first date. Then there's mud season. City people do not know about mud season. It is the period in early spring when the ground thaws and dirt roads become something that will consume a vehicle that is insufficiently prepared. I drove a sedan for the first 4 months, and then there's the matter of distances. Everything takes longer. The grocery run is 40 minutes each way. The good grocery store is 55. A medical appointment requires planning the way a small project requires planning. This sounds manageable until you're living it, and then it reshapes every habit you have around logistics. You stop popping out for one thing. You start thinking in bulk, keeping a running list, loading a chest freezer on Saturdays. And honestly, after a few months of it, the planning itself becomes a satisfying kind of rhythm that the on-demand economy never gave me. The practical surprises were manageable, but the financial ones hit differently. Now the money. Because this is where the fantasy version and the real version diverge most dramatically. Yes, the property costs less. In many rural areas, significantly less than urban equivalents. That part of the story is true. What the fantasy leaves out is what the property costs you once you're actually living in it. Old properties need work. The house I bought was described in the listing as full of character. Character, it turns out, is a real estate word for the heating system makes decisions independently. My first year, I spent more on the house than I had budgeted. Not catastrophically, but enough that I was genuinely grateful I had kept a financial cushion that most financial advice would call overly conservative. Whatever you think your first-year setup and repair costs will be, double it and keep that cushion liquid. The savings are real. They just take longer to arrive than the costs do. Energy costs can drop significantly if your setup is efficient. Food costs shift if you grow any of your own. Your general spending behavior changes when you're not surrounded by things to spend money on. According to the USDA Economic Research Service, rural households spend on average 12 to 15% less monthly on overall consumption than urban counterparts, once housing costs are controlled for. By month 18, My monthly outgoings were genuinely lower than they'd been in the city. Getting there cost more and took longer than I planned, but it happened. But the money turned out to be only part of what changed. Nobody warned me about this one specifically, or maybe they did, and I wasn't ready to take it seriously. When you leave the city, you leave the proximity that makes urban friendships easy. The spontaneous coffee, the "I was passing by anyway," the plans that materialize in 20 minutes because everyone is within the same radius. Some of my friendships survived, the ones built on something more than geography held. Those people came to visit, called on a Sunday morning for no particular reason, and were genuinely curious about what I was building, not just waiting for me to give up and come back. Some did not survive, and that was quieter and sadder than I'd expected. There's also a specific experience that nobody prepares you for: moving somewhere as a newcomer when you are not young. Making friends in your 50s in a tight-knit rural community is not the same as making friends in a city full of transplants, all actively looking for connection. People are friendly, they just aren't immediately open. You earn your way in over time, and that time is measured in seasons, not weeks. But when the connections do form, they're built differently. Not on shared interests or a good bar, but on proximity, mutual need, and showing up. Which, it turns out, is a very solid foundation. This is the part that surprised me the most. I expected to feel peaceful. I got peaceful. What I didn't expect was how long the path to it actually took, or what it would look like while I was on it. The city runs on urgency, and you absorb that state into your body over decades without noticing it, because everyone around you has absorbed it too. The commute, the deadline, the dinner reservation, the inbox, all of it carrying the same baseline pressure. When the urgency stops, you feel its absence like a phantom limb, and then, slowly, you stop reaching for it. By month 4, I noticed I was waking up without an alarm and not feeling behind. By month 6, I'd started reading books again, not articles, but actual books, because I had the attention span back. By the end of the first year, something in my chest that I hadn't realized was tight had become loose. I won't oversell that. I still have bad days. The house still breaks things. The mud season is still real. But the floor of what an ordinary day feels like had genuinely shifted, and I had not expected to get that back. 3 years in. The well pump has broken twice more since year 1. I now know how to diagnose the problem before I even call anyone. A genuinely small victory, and one I'm more proud of than is probably warranted. The sedan is gone. Now I drive a truck that has earned its existence approximately 40 times over. I work remotely 3 days a week and do local consulting work on the other 2. Income is lower than it was in the city. Expenses are lower enough that this is fine, and the spreadsheet has never been calmer. My sister came to visit last month. She stayed a full week. When she left, she said, "I think I understand it now." That is the most useful sentence anyone has said to me about this decision. I am not telling you to do what I did. I am telling you what I found when I did it. The city served me for 28 years. By 52, it had stopped being where I was supposed to be, and leaving was the best decision I've made in my adult life. So here's what nobody warned me about. The internet goes down and the well breaks. Mud season is real, and it will eat a sedan. The silence takes longer to adjust to than you expect, and the money takes longer to work out than the math suggests. Some friendships don't survive the geography, and somewhere in the middle of all of it, something in you that needed fixing gets fixed. If you're sitting in a city apartment right now, running your own quiet spreadsheet, wondering if this is something you could actually pull off, the next video breaks down the exact financial prep I did in the 18 months before I moved. The real numbers, the mistakes, and the one thing I do completely differently. Click it. I'll see you there.